What is up, everybody? Uh, I apologize a lot for that. I have no idea how to stream, so I think that's apparent for all of us.
What is up, everybody?
So at least the audio sounds good,
I
or at least it does on our end. So here we go. Um, Hello, everyone. My name is Justin. Go by SJW Debates Online, and I'm here with Harlan Rogers, who was kind enough to agree to a conversation with me. You kind of want to introduce yourself?
Hello there. Well, basically, you might have known me under a previous alias. That was called Fox from the West. And admittedly, I did a lot of social faux pas online. And during that time, my downtime, I sort of did a lot more sort of reading with regards to political philosophy, psychology, and general philosophy to hopefully sort of more shape my opinions and to develop myself further in my downtime. So I feel I am in a more sort of equipped position to debate instead of being a discount Dave Rubin. I honestly was.
All right. So yeah, that's a little bit of your backstory, and I do sincerely appreciate you coming on for this conversation. So the way it kind of started. So I want to introduce this, and you can tell me if you'd like to, put in your own input here. So online, there were some tweets that you had about how the woke left is not interested in conversation, and just responded to one of them saying, "Hey, I'm in the woke left. I'm interested in conversation. Would you like to have a conversation with me?" And you said yes, and it was that simple.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, so I think, and we agreed on a few topics here. I'm hoping at least the audio's sounding good, guys. Looks like just a still image of my face. I promise that I'm just gonna look like that the whole time. Nothing's gonna change. Uh, yeah, we'll yell at OBS later. So this is just podcast format. I hope nothing's gonna change. Yeah, there we go. So we kind of agreed on one central topic that can easily branch out into a bunch of other topics. So we kind of wanted to nail down what our moral and ethical foundations were in the kind of guide not just our online presence obviously, but where we are as people going forward. So, Harlan, do you want me to lead off, or do you want to go ahead and start? Kind of tell us more about where you come from.
Let's take the true enlightened centrist approach and flip a coin.
Flip a coin. Cool. I don't have a coin. I'm gonna flip my phone because that's what we do. It's a metaphor or something. It's a metaphor. All right. So call it screen side up or screen side down.
Down.
All right. Screen side up. Did it on camera. I threw my phone on camera. But luckily, no one can see it. So I'll tell you a little bit about where my ethical framework comes from. So my fundamental guiding principle is to reduce human suffering as much as possible. So that means it has necessarily put me more on the left, at least in terms of how I understand policy and how I understand positions. So when I see things like climate change, when I see things like healthcare, when I see things like human movement, I'm looking in all of those directions. I want to have data-driven solutions to reduce human suffering as much as possible. So when I that puts me in on the left, and am a proud representative of the woke left in this regard. So I'm hoping that we can kind of come to an understanding because a lot of your problems are with the woke left. If you are just perusing your Twitter profile, the woke left comes up a lot, and usually in a pretty negative way. So I hope I can change your mind at least a little bit. As one person in the woke left, I hope I can change your mind a little bit on that. So that's the basic spiel of it. I want to reduce human suffering as much as possible.
Well, honestly, I'm pretty much similar. Like, I would say the basis of my beliefs come from John Stuart Mill primarily, but also some other thinkers such as Lynn and Noam Chomsky. Those, I think, are the big three for me. But in terms of my overall goal, it is to sort of reduce the net harm in the world so as to ensure that every human being has at least a minimum standard that can be met so that they can survive. And at the moment, I don't think that's being met because people are dealing with mental traumas. People are dealing with, starvation in places such as, places which are generally more poverty driven than others. So people, whereas on the other hand, you have people at the top who are generally avaricious and hoarding wealth and only seeking to make investments instead of, or even just hoarding money, which is even worse, instead of actually applying it to help their fellow man. So I would say economically, I am Rooseveltian in the sense that while I still believe in a capitalist system, I am not a socialist or a communist. I do have sympathies and I do have, some agreements with their, especially their diagnosis and some of their proposed solutions with regards to universal healthcare, for example. And in terms of social views, I would describe myself as Millian in that sense, in that I believe
That's
generally,
John Stuart Mill, right?
yeah.
Okay.
So generally, I believe like the distinction to be made between Millian liberalism and it sometimes gets lumped in with classical liberalism, which is erroneous because Mill himself was very much he wasn't completely adverse to the free market capitalism, but he definitely had his critiques of it. Whereas classical liberalism is sort of more very encouraging of laissez-faire economics.
Yeah. So that's when I was doing research on all of that stuff, because sometimes it's hard when you use a proper name as an adjective. It's hard to look it up. Is when you say Rooseveltian, is that pretty close to positive Keynesian economics? Or,
Yeah, it is quite close to Keynesian economics. A if you want a very sort of simple way of me putting it, I'd say I'm a soc dem. I'm a social democrat.
okay, that is really interesting. I don't think you said anything that I disagree with in that whole spiel. Now, granted, economics is far from my area of expertise. I'm a
Oh, it's not mine either. Don't
Yeah,
worry.
yeah. I'm a biomechanics guy, so I love me some science, and economics is extremely complicated, and it's frustrating because there are no hard right answers that I can find, and I want my right answers. So I think that this isn't going to be very fun if we agree on this stuff. People are wanting a shit show, and people want me to fuck you up. So
Should we
yeah.
give them? Should we give them a shit show then?
Let's try to give them a little bit of a shit show. So, what is your problem with the woke left? Can you kind of explain first? What do you mean by the woke left, and what are your problems with us?
Well, as far as I can see, there are two camps in the left currently. There are well, actually, no, there's a lot more. But the two basic camps when I sort of talk about the woke left is that there is a left that is generally against identity politics unless it is driven on a class conscious basis. So these are people such as socialists and Marxists. Like these people tend to. You've probably heard the phrase "the only war is the class war."
Uh huh.
Thrown around. Like they think that this is the most important strife to be fought in the sense that they see many other social issues between liberals, conservatives, racial conflict, gender wars and things like that. They see those as a distraction and oftentimes conveniently manufactured to draw class conflict between groups.
I think a lot of these people self-describe as the dirtbag left. Have you ever heard that term before?
Yeah, some of them do. I wouldn't really call myself that.
It seems like a pejorative. I only use it because a lot of people self-describe themselves as that.
Yeah, people self-describe as that. I wouldn't say I'm completely in that camp because I still do consider social issues to be important. But my main grievance with the woke left is they seem very much preoccupied on maintaining these social issues, which I'm not saying we can't discuss social issues, but they have a very sort of uncritical and often very basic framework for judging these things to the point where it seems as if there is little in terms of critical thinking taking place. There is little in terms of analysis or understanding as to why they have those feelings. It is something that is generally from what I have seen from this grouping, that tends to be against people from expressing dissent, expressing controversial opinions in the not so much with force, like not so much with censorship, although that is a thing, but I think more with regards to social shaming and maintaining social norms. And that's quite interesting because I watched your video on human morality, and I think there's some interesting points. It was a good video, but I think there's some interesting points to be discussed on that.
Oh, of course, yeah. So, can you give it a specific example of kind of what you were talking about? in regards of squashing dissent and focusing too much on identity politics. Can you think of an example that would encapsulate that?
Well, I would say in terms of squashing dissent, Sam Harris made a tweet after I can't remember if I think it was after Nigel Farage got milkshaked and said that these are essentially mock assassinations in the sense that I don't think he was trying to say, oh, yeah, these people actually wanted to kill Nigel Farage, but he was trying to make the overall point that if it's this easy to do that, to throw a milkshake at someone, someone with more malevolent intentions could come along to potentially assassinate someone. And this has happened in the past. There was believe this was in 2002. There was a Dutch politician called Pim Fortuyn, I think is how you
Yeah.
say his name. He was sort of, how would I describe him? He was sort of in that Sargon sphere of not, I wouldn't call him like hard right, but he was sort of defined as hard right by the media. Whereas if you look at his policies, they're more sort of classical liberally based. So he had cakes thrown at him. And people just thought it was fun and games. People didn't think much of it. But then later on in the campaign trail, not too long before the election, he was assassinated and killed by an animal rights advocate,
Mm-hmm.
shot dead. So I think that we're not necessarily saying that the same conclusions are going to happen from what the woke left are doing to people such as Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson, Sargon, and all that. But I am sort of saying that the fact that it has come to this instead of actually having conversations like we're doing now. And when Sam Harris highlighted this, he was made out to look like they deliberately made him out to look stupid. That was their intent. It wasn't to give him a fair, conversation to express his viewpoint further. They just wanted to make him look stupid. It's a means of control. It's a means of social shaming. And I think John Ronson goes, who I really love. I love John Ronson. He goes into a lot of detail about the social shaming process and how it's a means of maintaining clout over people.
Well, yeah, but isn't shame is shame a bad thing necessarily? Is it an
Um,
intrinsically negative process?
it is a double-edged sword in the sense that it can be used for. It's kind of almost like a vigilante in the sense that yes, it can be used for good, but more often than not, it can also be employed as a means to, wreak havoc.
Yeah, well,
In a sense that it can.
so for example, if you think people are taking Sam's comment in bad faith, you're out there criticizing for it, you're directly trying to shame them out of having that opinion. So,
No, I'm not. I'm not saying they're not, allowed to feel, that Sam Harris is wrong.
yeah, but
I'm
you want
saying
them
the
to take
means in
different
which they.
actions, right?
Well, what they're doing is essentially trying to make Sam Harris look stupid instead of remotely entertaining his point as a means of praxis, as a means of trying to apply uh,
What
power.
so what
Because
if
I
yeah,
think
so I took that point, I took it as you said, and I still don't think it was a good point. I still think that trying to escalate milkshaking to assassinations, I think that is really, really ramping up rhetoric. That's making that to be more dangerous than it is. Now, there is a case to be made that yes, violence and milkshakes are a form like they are a form of violence. So it's like dumping water on somebody. But to lump that in with okay, this is actual like causing physical harm, and then up to oh, this could be a mock assassination. I think there also is criticism to be made against Sand that man, you are really trying to make these people out to be way more dangerous than they probably are.
I mean, for starters, there is historical precedent with the Pim Fortune case, but also if you look at the means in which these groupings on the left talk about people that they're critical of, it's essentially dehumanized them. They've made them out to become, seem like monsters, boogeymen that need to be undermined at all possible costs instead of entertaining them to have some kind of conversation. Like this is something I realized actually back in the Fox from the West days is I was perpetually ridiculed on Twitter, and that actually had a negative effect on me and my personal, self perception of self. Like that actually made me feel bad about myself. And now I realize, yes, a lot of what I said was misguided and stupid, but I also see it as a means of trying to make, put me down in my place as a means of maintaining some kind of social control and cohesion.
So
Like
do you think that the
that is what shaming essentially is. It's a means to try make people, um,
think and
stay in
behave a
line.
different way? Well, we also shame racists and homophobes. And it's a good thing that we shame them. It's actually so. There's been a lot of sociological research done on shame, and shaming is a good way to get someone to change their opinion or at least to think differently about it. So shame is a neutral term. We shame racists, we shame homophobes because we want them to stop thinking that way, because the way they're thinking is going to cause a net harm to people. So shame is a tool. It's neutral. The way it can be used can be good or bad, but I think so. Can you think of another specific example? Because I was that's kind of weird. The woke left. That's not
Well,
really
I want
the
to sort of
milkshake
touch
thing is
upon.
identity
I want to
politics
sort
or
of touch
something.
upon.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to sort of touch upon the idea of shame, and that I do think it's mostly a combative negative thing. Not to say that it can't be used for good in the same sense that a vigilante can be used to achieve some sort of good, but I would say generally shaming is a means of, for example, if you were to shame a racist, then yes, if that person does not become becomes racist, not is no longer racist, then yeah, that's fine, that's good. But I feel that there are actually more productive ways as a means of getting people to stop being racist. And there's a friend of mine that I've known for a while who at one point did adopt very much white nationalist talking points, like very far alt right talking points. And with the help of me and a few other people, we essentially managed to talk him down, not by treating him, not by vilifying him as a monster, not by pushing him to the outskirts of society and making him feel even more alienated, but rather trying to discuss what he felt and not necessarily demeaning him, but by countering his perceptions to try and create an environment. Because I mentioned before we went on stream that I've been looking at Alderian psychology.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of need to shape the environment that the individual is in order to sort of achieve a positive multiplier, to achieve a positive result. You're not going to get that. This is why the incel community, for example, is just never going to get better. It's a constant, black hole of self-loathing and depression.
So
Like you,
do you agree that conversations, like when you sit down to have a conversation with someone without the goal of shaming, just to kind of sit and talk, that the goal is some sort of compromise, right?
yes, I would say.
So this is
Although
yeah. Go ahead.
I would say generally, if you're trying to achieve some kind of goal for the betterment of people, which I think that's what politics is. Politics is a means of trying to establish a common good for the citizenry of a nation or of the world or of a city state or what have you.
So you understand that this is me as a representative of the woke left talking. So if we're talking to someone, if to sit down and have a conversation with a homophobe who doesn't want me to be married, that there is no compromise there. I'm either married or I'm not. If we meet in the middle, I'm not married. I'm either fully married or I'm not. So if we meet in the middle there's nothing to be gained from having that conversation. The only thing that possibly could be gained is them coming over to my side, but that is a pretty big risk. Like if
Yes, I understand that there are positions where you can either be one thing or against it. So, for example, gay marriage, you can either support it or you can be against it. And I think dealing with someone, I myself am pro gay marriage, but say as if you're dealing with someone who is against it, I would sort of try to identify why exactly, what is the crux of why these people feel what they are in order to understand and better deal with their point. What I get from the woke left when I try to do that is generally dismissal. And this is, I think, the right wing, not so much now, but definitely a couple of years back, capitalized on in getting people to, further along the alt-right pipeline, is that they were willing to introduce these ideas. I'm sure you've seen like I forget what they're called, the Atomwaffen, the
yeah.
Atomwaffen, or whatever they're called.
Mm-hmm.
They are willing to sort of thrust these ideas such as read siege. Like, it's a meme, I make fun of it, but it doesn't, like, they do actually try and engage people to join their cause. The woke left sort of assumes that or if you do not already have these positions, you are inherently a bad person and worth giving up on.
I think it's a little bit unfair. A lot of, especially left-wing content nowadays. So BreadTube is becoming a thing. We're having a surge of left-wing content that wasn't there in the past, and most of it is geared toward making strong cases against people. Most of it is geared towards like taking a position an idea from the right, and then like detailing. Here are the factual inaccuracies. Here's the logical conclusion of what they say, and why is that's a bad thing. Here are the effects if these policies were carried out. So I think we're having a big resurgence in facts and reason and logic and ideas coming out. But there's also the case to be had that you really shouldn't compromise with someone who doesn't think that you should have rights. And it's hard to have those kind of conversations on places like Twitter, where at the end of the day, what matters is the vote. What matters is public perception right now. So it's really
I have a
yeah.
much more pessimistic view of that, but I'll let you finish.
Yeah, I say it's very difficult to have those kind of conversations online unless you. That's why I like sitting down and talking to people right here. But I also agree that, man, if this was if you were like an alt-right shitbag, this would not be a fun. This would be a fun conversation. But I'm not trying to change their mind. I'm trying to destroy them in debate. I'm trying to absolutely fucking dismantle them, dunk on them, make them look as stupid as possible. That doesn't seem like it's coming at in good faith, because it isn't. Because I don't want to come in good faith. I don't want to endear myself to their audience. I want their audience gone. That is
Okay.
the authoritarian woke left in me, but I think I can defend that pretty well.
Okay, well, I can understand why you would have that view in terms of dealing with someone who is a neo Nazi. I can understand that. But my issue with that is that the woke left as a collective has applied this so broadly to every concept that is alien to them.
Hold on, you realize
Or
you just
rather,
said that the woke left as a collective applies this concept broadly, right?
yes, I'm aware. I'm aware that is applying it broadly, but I'm sort of speaking about a general group in that they're applying it to multiple individuals in a sense. Like they are applying it. I'm not saying every woke left person thinks like this. I'm saying as a generalization, they apply this to a myriad of individuals, whether or not they're Nazis or not. This applies to centrists. There's, for example, there's
You cut out. What's up?
communities that focus on
There we
shaming
go.
Jordan Peterson fans. Are they sort of on that same neo-Nazi level, or
Okay,
are they
here. I think
potentially
I
worth
can.
convincing?
I think the I can be. I think I hold a lot of these positions myself, so you can talk directly to me. So I'll make my position that I think that this is what you're talking about. I think people like Tim Pool, Andy No, Jordan Peterson, to a lesser extent Sam Harris, but to a small extent. Let's just stick with those three: Andy No, Tim Pool, and Jordan Peterson. I do think that they are functionally pushing people to the right. I do think that they are functionally aiding in fascism. And to me, and whether or not they're fascists, like they themselves, whether or not they are fascists, is of no consequence and very uninteresting to me. Because one, we can never know, and two, since I'm focused on effects rather than I want to know what happens if you push that along. That's really what matters. I don't care if you are a racist person. I care if you push forward racist rhetoric that could push people towards being that. That's what matters. So I do think that people like those three that I mentioned push people towards something close to fascism. That doesn't mean they have to push them all the way. That doesn't mean that they're Nazis, but that really doesn't matter. What they're doing is directly causing harm to people, and that's why I'm against them.
Okay, I think I understand sort of the crux of our disagreement here in the sense that you see fascism as the ultimate evil end goal. You are defined by wanting to undermine neo-Nazism, fascism at any and all costs to prevent it from happening again.
Yep.
Am I correct in saying that? Okay.
Fairly, yeah.
Now, yeah, on paper, that's a good thing. And obviously, I agree in undermining neo Nazism and fascism. But I think what a lot of people like, this is the sort of philosophy that I understand of as the sort of woke left philosophy, is that there are more bad ideologies than fascism and neo Nazism. Yes, neo Nazism, fascism is awful, but there is a lot of truth in the Nietzsche quote. If you gaze into the abyss long enough, the abyss will gaze back into you. And this is what I think has happened, and this sort of relates to your video on comedy as well, in that this portion of the left has become so dedicated to destroying fascism. I mean, there's literally a group dedicated to fighting fascism called Antifa right now.
Mm-hmm.
When honestly, I do not think fascism as it stands, is as prevalent as they make it out to be. It has no societal clout, that they have essentially become mired in combating fascism above all else. They have become an ideology opposed to something, as opposed to an ideology that stands for something. And they are opposed to something that, I've got to be completely honest, I do not see very much as a threat, because I think the public at large, rightfully, 100% rightfully, has denounced fascism and neo-Nazism. I think
they denounce the extreme end products of fascism. So obviously, most people are going to look at Nazi Germany in in the 1940s during World War II as abhorrently bad, where a lot of people don't. But people are drawing a binary of things like fascism and extreme right-wing ideology. It's not a binary; it's a spectrum. So it doesn't, like, we don't have to get to that point before it's worth taking on. So there are lots of things going on right now. So, for example, Trump is a serial liar. He has told thousands of lies in office. He has routinely engaged in racist rhetoric. He has routinely disparaged, what's it called, grievance politics. Like, anybody who speaks ill of him is an enemy of the United States. That is, and that's, I am saying that like with a straight face. That's not me hyperbolizing. He has basically made it out to anybody who criticizes him is an enemy of the United States. We are locking up kids at the border. We are locking up people at the border as a deterrent. So we're using this as a deterrent when it was legal process to do so. And the scary part is he has support in the United States. A lot of support. So when you say you don't see it happening, I see 40% of the United States supporting a man who is very, very close to being a full-blown fascist. And now is when we have to fight back against that stuff. Not when it is further along. Now is when we have to put a stop to it.
I'll throw you a bone in the sense that one of the things that did actually worry me, and is during a Trump rally when he brought up Ilhan Omar, who I think is probably the most overhated person by the right. Like the amount of rage that Ilhan Omar draws is just ridiculous, in my opinion. It's just like, guys, she's not a fucking Al Qaeda Wahhabist apologist. Just please be quiet. Like, but when she brought up her name, or I think it was her, the audience then began suddenly chanting, "Send her back, send her back."
Yep.
Now that actually was quite alarming to me. Like, that actually stemmed to me as, this is not only political illiteracy, this is political illiteracy made with malice of intent. And
he sat there and
I don't think that's necessarily representative of the entire Trump audience. I think people can sort of be talked out of that presumption.
It plays very well right now, though.
But
and if you're still a Trump supporter at this point, I don't think
that was actually kind of you know what, that you've got to cut. The work left have got very much a point about that if people are going to go around chanting that, because that's kind of disgusting. But on the other hand, I would say Donald Trump, to me, is closer to a neocon, like closer to someone like George W. Bush, rather than a full-blown fascist. I think Trump, very much like Obama, this is sort of a take I've shared in some sort of anti-Idpol left circles, and they've actually not really agreed with it that much. I think Trump and Obama both came into office with the intent to try and change things. The problem is that the system changed them. Trump and Obama both became products of the neo-economic system, and I call it neo-economic because it essentially combined neoliberalism and neoconservatism together.
So wait, when you say that the system changed Trump, what about what he promised, and what about his rhetoric during his campaign? What's changed? How did the system change him? How has he not been working towards all of the goals that he explicitly
stated? Well, for example, if you look at the wall, Trump was insisting, by the end of 2017, we're going to get the wall up. And it's, near the tail end now of 2019, and there's still no wall.
Well, yeah,
and it's not just because...
That's due to incompetence, and not because of the system changed him.
Exactly. He's incompetent. It's not because he's a fascist, because if he were a fascist, he would have gotten that up with very little problems at all. Whereas if I see him more as being held back, because that would be a threat to the economic interest of the neo-economical order. He is in his social policies, he is more conservative, he is more right-wing than someone like Obama, who was more left-leaning in his social
Well,
policies. But the
that's a
thing
very
is,
controversial statement to say Trump is more right wing than Obama. I would say he
no,
is.
yeah, no. I'll
I'm kidding. I'm
explain it.
kidding. I'm kidding. Obviously, he's more right
Don't
wing.
trust me. There are people that will argue that, but I will say that their priority, or at least the priority that they've been shaped into believing, is to maintain the economic status quo and maintain maintain it so that the elite attain strength and the corporatocracies reign over national governments instead of the governments having soft power. It's basically Chomsky's allusion as to why he would not describe um,
So
America as like America's system, like how social liberalism and economic liberalism are incompatible. Because if you have economic liberalism, you essentially bring about private tyranny. I think what has happened is essentially there has almost been a soft power. There is a soft power in which the corporatocracy maintains hegemony
all this
over
is,
national
I think all
governments.
this is great, but Trump is pushing forth policies for grievance against people he doesn't like. It doesn't seem he doesn't understand the broader economic principles by what he's talking about. He wants to get what he wants, and he wants to hurt the people he doesn't like. The trade war with China is because he doesn't like that China is beating us in certain things, and he needs to win. That's why he's doing it, not to improve the economy or help workers. It's because he has grievances with China. He has grievances against people south of the border because he doesn't like them. He thinks they're rapists. He is racist against them, or rather, at least that's functionally how it works.
Yes, that is his rhetoric on the campaign trail, and he
He's deep,
sometimes
yeah,
acts on it in office.
yeah.
But if you look at the general behavior of Donald Trump in comparison to Barack Obama or any president, I would say, up until before Reagan, I would say their behavior very much has been similar in terms of economic policy, in terms of foreign policy. These are the issues in which this is why Tulsi Gabbard has gotten very popular, in that she has pointed out these issues, these relationships with Israel, these relationships with Saudi Arabia. She has essentially highlighted these as what is driving America as a country forward, whereas Trump is he's sort of a symptom rather than the cause in this sense. I don't think it's fair to call him fascist. I would say he is more just he's not entirely a puppet, but he is essentially a tool in which the establishment maintains its power. He's not pushing the buttons too much because if he does, they know that they will destroy him.
It's really conspiratorial. That sounds really conspiratorial to me to say that he's. I agree. He is extremely stupid. I agree with that 100%. But man, he's trying to get a lot of stuff done, and he's making steps toward getting these things done, and a lot of Republicans support him in doing that. So, I do not think he's a puppet of anyone. I think his ego is so gigantically large that he just.
I mean, to an extent, you are right. I'm not saying. I mean, maybe it was a bit extreme of me to say that he was a puppet, but there are certainly people keeping him in check, much as there have always been entities to keep presidents in check ever since Nixon and Watergate, I would say.
Actually, can I ask you a question? I promise this relates. I promise I'll bring it back to this. What is your definition of political correctness?
Political correctness? I don't know. I think it sort of depends on the context. Like, I would say political correctness is a means to create a language. I don't use the term very much, but it's essentially to create a language that makes everybody in the conversation feel comfortable. Like, I think that would be a fair definition. I don't use the term that much myself because it's somewhat of a nebulous term.
So that's not too far. I think I have a very good concrete definition that will fit all contexts. So to me, being politically correct means that you are tailoring your speech to gain approval from an audience. You may or may not actually believe what you're saying, but your primary goal is to gain approval from your audience.
I would say that's more sort of playing the political game. That's not
that's
so
why
much
it's called.
political
I say that's
correctness.
why it's called politically correct. You're doing what is correct politically in the political game. That's why it's called politically correct. So when you now it's changed so much depending on who's in power. What is deemed politically
Yeah,
correct?
sure. Yeah.
Like yeah, like showing two gay people on screen used to be considered very politically incorrect to do. Now it's just seen as, or it's still politically incorrect to do it depending on the context. Actions don't make political correctness. Context and audience make political correctness. So that politically correct is a reaction. So in a lot of cases, disparaging gay people is very politically correct depending on your audience. So when Trump is hyping up the crowd, yelling at his opponents and saying how they hate America, they hate the Jew. That's my terrible Trump impression. When he's doing that, he's being
Got that.
extremely politically correct because that's what he wants above all
He is
else.
pandering to his audience, but I would not say that's. If anything, I would say that's politically correct, given the general lexicon for what is acceptable in the conversation in America. I
Yeah.
would say he. It is very much politically incorrect in how he is the general lexicon of conversations in terms of politics, but I would say it is deliberately catered to his crowd as a means to galvanize support. He is speaking in a language, as Malcolm X, I think it was Malcolm X said, I want to speak to everyone in a language that everyone here can understand. He is essentially doing that. He is.
Yes.
I'm going to nick to
All of this
get a drink.
all that meets my definition of politically correct, but I'll wait for you.
Anyway, I'm just going to nip to get
Yeah,
a drink real quickly because my throat is getting sore.
Gotcha. I'll interact with all 9 people in the chat. All right, how we doing, y'all? It's not as bombastic as it could have been, but you know what? That's not necessarily a bad thing. I apologize that there's no video, but at least it sounds okay. I believe, hopefully. Uh, do. Hey, Vadim, what's up, dude? If we didn't have checks and balances, yes, it would be way, 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 way worse. I think we're going to get into hopefully more specific issues. We're talking really, really broadly, and I want to get more into specifics and talking about that.
Right, I'm back. I've got some water now. I was going to say,
Uh,
I think the means in which we're using the term political correctness, you're sort of making it as a sort of more, or you're sort of observing it from a more micro level in the sense that it's dependent on the audience on what makes it politically correct. So you're sort of judging it by audience to audience, whereas I'm sort of looking at it from a larger sort of macro scale in this is how the entirety of America, this is the general Overton window of what is acceptable in the conversation.
I don't believe I am because my definition, politically correct is a reaction. It's not the statement itself is politically incorrect or politically correct. It's the reaction to it. So that is encompassing every listener who is doing it, and you can get a general sense of was that statement, did that go well, and so depending on the audience, and the audience could be the entirety of America or it could be everybody at a Trump rally. So it would be different. The same statement would be interpreted different across the different audiences because that is what it is. It's reaction. And not unlike comedy, it's reaction.
Okay, fair enough.
So I think he is extremely politically correct president, that's the hot take of the century right there. I think he's one of the most PC presidents we've had in a while because he wants approval from his audience. Now, granted that he wants to piss off anybody who doesn't like him a ton, so maybe I can, you can say that's a little bit. I guess I could walk that back a little bit, but in his element, which is his rallies, he is an extremely effective. There's a word for it.
Orator?
Orator. Sure, yeah, orator. He's extremely effective at what he does.
Yes, I would agree in communicating with his audience, which are generally sort of. I'm going to get accused of being an elitist here when I say this, but generally people who are less involved. How can I say this where it doesn't make me sound like a dick?
They have less education. They tend to be
Yeah, they're sort of lower on the economic chain and less educated. Those are the people that generally sort of attend these rallies. They are sort of driven more by instinct rather than facts or logic. I mean, and I think that's the case for a lot of people who go to rallies, irrespective of political leanings,
of course,
right or left. Like I would say, generally the people who want to go to these things, same with people nowadays who engage in politics, it has become more like WWE than politics was in the past. Politics in the past was more about discussing issues, sort of coming to a compromise, like me and you are doing here. Whereas nowadays it's become a competition to own the libs or own the cons and stuff like that. It's become very much like I'm trying to think of the word, like very much like a quick fix, like a serotonin. Is it a serotonin hit or is it something else?
We tend to whitewash a lot of what happened in the past. So when we say everything used to be, a lot more civil and things like that, are you familiar with the civil rights movement in the United States at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think about how do you think that the collective zeitgeist thinks about that movement now? I think it was like peaceful demonstrations. It was a very good thing.
I don't think that at all. I think there was a myriad. It was a very sort of multiple. There were multiple prongs to it, in which yes, you had people such as Martin Luther King, who very much encouraged, didn't encourage violence, but generally encouraged sort of peaceful marches and demonstrations. They were still demonstrations. There were still people going out and saying, "We do not agree with this. This is our opinion." But there were, of course, also people who, such as Nation of Islam, Black Panthers, who are more willing to resort to extremist ends as a means of conveying their point of view. And this
we
also
tend to
applied
view
to groups such as
the former as more favorably, right? Or that we say that they're the main civil rights advocates, but everybody in that was labeled as terrorists back in the day. It was seen as an extremely violent, dangerous movement. The overall opinions at the day of the civil rights movement were negative. Like, more people did not approve of it because they thought that they were violent. And so we've now painted over this extremely violent time in history since we had good outcomes, and now you want to be on the right side of history. We kind of after the fact, label it as, well, this was them working within this system. This was them.
Oh, it definitely had its ugly side to it. I'm not going to deny that it had its. There were aspects of it which were not great, but it was a positive force for change, in the same way that Gandhi's fight against the caste system in India was generally regarded as a good thing, even though there was misery, even though there was conflict.
Yeah,
it is generally seen as a socially just outcome, which it was.
Anytime someone wants to denounce terrorism, who describes themselves as a patriot, like, dude, that's how we started. Straight up unambiguous terrorism. So that's how we started, straight up terrorism, like not working within the system, like trying to destroy the system with violence, and we ended up doing it. But now that's called a revolution. So history is written by the victor, and whatever means you use to get to achieve your goals, a lot of people will immediately reverse them.
Well, this actually sort of ties into the woke left, in which they have this same similar kind of mentality, in that the history is written by the victors, and we are excused as a means to act in this manner, in this socially mobbing manner, so long as we, do not resort to means such as mass shootings, for example. But in a sense, they don't have to, because I already think that they are in a preferential position of power in terms of the social zeitgeist. They don't need to resort to mass shootings.
Do you really think that, though? In the social zeitgeist?
I generally do, yes, in the West. I'm not saying in the Middle East or anything like that.
What are some woke left positions that you think? What are some woke left positions?
Oh, well, this is going to be the can of worms I didn't want to open, all right? But
we got to get a bit spicy.
If I talked about this if I talked about this on more detail in Twitter, I would probably get banned.
Okay, well, I won't ban you.
I think the main thing for me is with regards to transgenderism and its general acceptance as there are more than you can essentially change gender as a social construct, which I do not agree with. I think it's a very complex subject to unpack, but essentially I see it as very similar to body dysmorphia in a sense that people feel that there is an inequality with their body, their natural between body and mind, and as a result of that, this causes grief, and they seek to change that without realizing that there are other means in which to improve yourself that do not need to resort to such needs, such as, for example, anorexia within people with gender dysphoria, or fully transitioning with body dysmorphia, and then fully transitioning with gender dysphoria.
So it's interesting. You said you were a Millsian socialist, so just from John Stuart Mill, but this seems to go against one of the things he thought was the most dangerous, blights on society is that there are few who dare to be that so few dare to be eccentric marks the chief danger of the time. He wanted
absolutely, I agree with that.
eccentricities, and so now we're kind of forcing a gender norm on people and forcing language on people who want to be different, who want to be. Eccentric is just the word I'm using from him, but
because those are based in natural sciences. Like John Stuart Mill, when he said that quote, he wasn't trying to say. He wasn't trying to say
based in natural sciences, or first of all, I view all sciences is valid across all fields. If we can understand it, it can be we can study it scientifically, and so there's lots of science that supports the notion that transitioning for trans people is the way to go. It is the way to
because it's been pigeonholed as the only solution. We've not tried anything else.
Yes, we have.
Before that.
We absolutely have tried other stuff. What are you talking about?
No, hang on. Let me finish. Okay. Before that, there was legitimate discrimination against trans people where they weren't allowed to express their gender identity. There was an actual social norm, and there was a social zeitgeist in which trans people were discriminated against and shamed for who they are. Now that is no longer the case. The only solution that is being presented nowadays...
I can't let you get away with that one. I'm sorry. What do you mean it's no longer the case? Of course it's the case. Us trans people are still shamed broadly and widely.
Not to the extent as they were, though. I'm talking about... Remember the AIDS campaigns? This didn't just affect trans people. This affected LGBT people as well.
Yeah, but so I think this is a big criticism I have of people who are not on the woke left, because it is better. But why is that good enough? Why is it just since they weren't as badly treated as they were in the past? Why should we stop?
Because at this point, I mean, yes, there are legitimate issues in which you could say yes. This is what trans rights are. This is what I think, for example, there's housing discrimination. There's the military ban put in place by Trump. Yep. There is legitimate systematic discrimination against.
And there's also lots of social. There's also lots of social discrimination.
Yes, but here's the thing. That's not a right. Social discrimination, you can't characterize that as a right. That's an attitude. And
I don't care if it's a right or not.
And you can say, oh, I think attitude should change, and I can completely understand that. But it's not a right.
But rights are a means to an end, and I want to reduce human suffering. And so it doesn't matter if it's a right or not. It doesn't matter if it's legal or not. I want to reduce human suffering and changing people's minds.
And I personally do not see that as a means. I do not see transitioning as a means of reducing that suffering overall, because it is not attacking the root of the problem. It is a symptom. I see it as a symptom.
You're just
general feelings of it.
Sorry, man, you're just factually incorrect on that. So I want to link to you a study. So this was a not even a study, a compilation of studies compiled by Cornell University that looked at the outcomes. Yes, it's 70 plus studies. Now, granted, a lot of them were reviews, but the evidence overwhelmingly points to that transitioning vastly improves health outcomes for adults and for children.
I am skeptical of that page for several reasons. Because first and foremost, I could essentially, I'm not saying that they'd be right, but I could essentially go out and try and find several papers of my own disputing that, and I could probably draw together 74 papers arguing that narrative if I really wanted to. I think that there is a certain agenda that was attempted to be pushed by publishing that, and that is my core
Okay,
issue.
so why hasn't anybody
Secondly,
done
from
that?
from the papers that I've read the Sweden study, and I've also read there's a study done in Amsterdam. It was somewhere in the Netherlands. I've read a few others, but
Yeah,
I've kind of
I
forgotten
read
them
both
over
of those.
time.
Yeah,
Are you familiar with the study in the Netherlands?
both. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, if it's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, essentially what happened was they brought a number of people underwent HRT and gender reassignment surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And after a period of about 5 years, I think it was, they interviewed them, and it was presented that overwhelmingly these people were happy with transitioning.
Yeah.
The thing is with that is that they only got about 17% of the people back. They only got 17% of the people who transitioned back for an interview, for a formal interview.
Yeah.
Where's the other 83%?
That's a problem in
Why are they not
science.
accounted for?
It's a problem
That
in
is
science.
important. Did they say no? Are they dead? You don't know anything about that. You've only got the 17% who consented to the interview, and there's no data on the 83%. I'm not saying those are the exact numbers. I'm saying that they missed out a huge portion of the people who underwent HRT and who underwent gender reassignment surgery,
Okay, there
and
are
only got the people who consented to
Well,
it.
yeah, there are problems with lots of studies, and like what's it called?
That is a fatal flaw with the study.
Okay, so
Because that is
it's not the only
that is
study
a
though.
minute.
So,
yes, I know it's not
yeah,
the only study, but
gender cognition in transgender children, published in Psychological Science in 2015. 32 trans kids preferred and identified alongside cisgender peers of the same gender and opposite their assigned sex. So their gender identity was established early on. So they're an average age of 9. Mental health of transgender children who are supported in their identities. This study looked at 73 kids who says that if they are supported in their identities, they show no elevations of depression and only slightly elevated levels of anxiety relative to their cis peers. Gender development in transgender preschool children, so 36 3 to 5-year-olds, didn't differ from controls matched on age and expressed gender on gender preference, behavior, and belief measures. Like,
okay,
there's a lot. I know that seems like that is gish galloping. I'm sorry, but
yes. I agree that if they have an environment in which they are supported, there are generally going to be more positive outcomes. I don't disagree with that, which is why I make it my mission to not, misidentify, deliberately not mispronoun people or treat trans people like shit. I don't discriminate against trans people. Like, I hate people who do that. Like, there are people out there who...
Yeah, we can agree on that.
Yeah. My issue is that it is based on a perception which is inherently warped, because I personally view the means in which we define sex, as in, the sex we are pre-assigned at birth, I see that as the same definition as gender. And I think the means in which gender has been redefined is a very broadly philosophical argument as a means of trying to articulate...
well, it's a philosophical argument as
a means to steel man that, oh, well, as long as you feel like you are a male, then you can be a male.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be like, the thing is, when I talk about this is that I feel like such a dick. Like, I feel like and the reason I try and avoid talking about it, because it feels like I'm saying, you know what, you're not really a guy, fuck you. Like, I'm not trying to say that to be a dick. Like, I'm just trying to say, I do not think this is what you actually are. Ergo, I think you should be comfortable with yourself as is present, rather than going through with something which may not actually solve the problem.
Well, again, you got me. I'm very data driven.
This is why the post-op suicide rates are still high, when you should imagine that they decrease.
All right. So, are you talking about the Sweden study? Is that where you're getting that information from?
This applies to also even people who are very much for the argument have said, for the argument of transitioning, have said, yes, suicide rates are still alarmingly high when it is when they have transitioned. And the excuse that I see banded around a lot is, oh, well, it's because of social discrimination. And I don't think that can necessarily be quantified. I think the
Again, where are you getting that information from? Are you getting it from the Sweden study?
What information exactly are you talking about?
The high suicide rates post-transition.
This is generally agreed upon by all studies. Like, this is something even people such as, like, the fucking Heritage Foundation study, which is nonsensical, even they sort of agree to, yes, the suicide rate is still high.
The Heritage Foundation didn't do a study. You're thinking about an article that was written by a doctor named Ryan D. Anderson.
Yeah,
and he didn't do a
but
study.
but
He
but
wrote a
but, but,
book,
but I'm talking about it is a generally agreed consensus that the
and
suicide rates in those who are post-op are still dramatically higher. I'm not saying they're higher. I'm not saying they're lower. I'm just saying it is generally agreed upon by all people that the suicide rates are still high. And the excuse that I see banded around a lot is, oh, it's because of social discrimination. But I think that the cause more so lies in upon doing that, they realized that the faults that they were trying to ail, which was gender dysphoria, is actually a general discomfort in one's skin, and by transitioning they have accomplished nothing.
all right. So I pulled up something. I pulled up an article that discusses that, and they say that um, uh, that might be so the improved outcomes for trans people, and the might be improved by improved healthcare for transsexual persons and altered societal attitudes. So yeah,
I wouldn't disagree with that.
yeah. So societal attitudes do play a big role.
Sure.
So
But
why did you say that they didn't earlier?
first and foremost, I'm saying that that's not a right. And secondly, I'm saying it
I don't
is
care if it's a
still
right or not.
defined on. Yeah, but that's how it's categorized. That's how it's pigeonholed by people. When people say, trans rights, like that is what they mean. They mean societal attitudes.
Yes.
That they don't talk about the actual discrimination, such as housing discrimination
Yes,
and
we
trans
do.
military. But now, yeah, they do talk about that, but not when they say trans rights. When
It's
people
because a
just
lot
sort
of
of
people try.
say,
It's because a lot of people try to stop the conversation at, well, you have all the same rights. Okay, we're done. What societal discrimination is enormously important, like how we interact with our day-to-day people, how we interact with our family, how we interact with our coworkers is enormously important for your mental health.
okay,
Probably
then
more so
frame
than
it as
laws.
that.
I,
That,
I
that
am
the
right
conversation.
now.
Yeah, you are. But I'm talking about generally. Why do we need to keep going trans rights and trying framing it like it's two completely separate things? Like I'm not saying that you are wrong in saying I think that we should be kinder to trans people. I'm saying that that argument is often presented by the woke left as just trans rights, and no, they're two completely different things. I think that's kind of
Yeah, I
politically
do agree that
illiterate.
we say catch-all when we say trans rights. We're talking about actual legal definitions, legal battles, and also societal attitudes.
Which obviously, yeah, we've agreed that those do exist. Like there are obviously legal issues in which there is discrimination, not only against trans people, but even I was talking earlier about the housing discrimination. This
Hmm.
also affects uh, LGBs also.
Yeah, of
That
course.
landlords can freely discriminate against them uh, if they do not agree with their sexual
Yeah,
preferences.
and that's a legal battle that we need to fight. But the legal battles and social battles aren't separate from each other. They're enormously intertwined with each other. I mean, certain groups might not have legal protections because of societal attitudes. That was certainly the case back in the 50s and 60s with black people, and up until like 2015, it was certainly the case for gay marriage. Like the legal and the social attitudes were completely intertwined. I mean, if you find someone who doesn't support gay marriage as illegal, right, you can probably find that same person also doesn't support gay people on a social level either. So these two things are enormously intertwined with each other. They overlap so much that the Venn diagram is almost a circle.
I mean, I think I should outline at this point that I'm not. I don't think transitioning should be made illegal. Like, in case that's not clear, I don't think transitioning should be made illegal. I think people have the actual liberty to go ahead and do that.
Yes,
Like,
and
I'm not saying, oh yeah, we should ban transitioning or anything. Like, I'm not saying that you necessarily believed I did that. I'm just saying that
uh,
for clarity.
I know, but I want to take it a step further to say that the scientific research says that for most people, transitioning is the way to go to improve their mental health. That's what the research says.
Because that's the only solution that has been presented as
What's another
opposed to
solution?
solutions in what my proposition is that encouraging people to be comfortable in one's own skin. Like there are psychological means, there are things such
Wait,
as
why?
CBT.
I was gonna say, why do you draw a distinction between that? Like, transitioning is the exact thing you just said. Like, to be comfortable in your own skin, that's why they transition in the first
Well,
place.
well, this comes back to my definition of gender, in which I do think it is generally the same gender as what we call sex today. I think it has been changed as a means to philosophically justify these kinds of arguments. It's a
Right.
means of steel manning them,
I can
which
very,
I do not do.
well, I can very easily steelman the argument of why sex and gender should be different things. Very easily. So, for example, how would you determine biological sex?
Uh, by the genitals in which they are born with.
Okay, let's say it's genitals. Now, there are like 6 different markers of biological sex, and none of them are binary. So, to just know that's what the science on this. But I'm giving that. I'm steel manning your argument. So, by the genitals that you're born with, that's your sex. That's what we'll say for the purposes of this philosophical meandering that I'm doing.
Okay.
How many genitals do you see on a day-to-day basis when you interact with people?
None except probably my own when I wake up.
I say, unless you have a very interesting life, probably close to none. So, but you know that people are presenting as men, they're presenting as women, they're identifying as men and women, and we take them at
Well, that's
their
based
word.
on a sort of social taboo.
Yeah, that's why gender is different.
Yeah, well, it's based essentially on the social. The reason why you don't go around seeing, looking at other people's genitals to determine if they're male or female is that, yeah, that's generally just a social taboo. You just don't go around doing that.
But we also have societal expectations on men and women too. So if you see a man wearing a dress, and I'm saying, and a cis man identifies as a man, if you see him wearing a dress, do you think that's weird? There's no there's no biological reason why dresses are for one gender.
It depends on the context, really.
I'm just walking around, briefcase, like going to work. Like these things are socially constructed.
This is more to do with gender roles rather than actual gender, which I do think is a social construct.
Yeah, also gender
roles. Yeah, gender roles are the social construct in this equation, not gender itself. The reason we assign dresses, for example, with women, because that is our general sort of role that we have sort of preconceived of women generally. It's a stereotype. And as a result of that, that is a social construct that we have created. It's not the act of gender, which is a social construct. It's the gender role.
Okay, I want to bring it back just a little bit. What are some other what are other means other than transitioning that you think that trans people should try that would work better? Even though transitioning is backed up by the scientific research.
I don't know. That's still, the jury's still out on that. But I would say generally, I think people should be made to feel comfortable in their own, like I said, in their own skin, and to be comfortable with their designated sex. I think that's probably a more healthy solution than trying to deceive people based on something which is not.
So how is that position not trying to keep people from transitioning? Which doesn't work. It doesn't improve mental well-being.
I mean, no, it's not saying, "Oh, I'm going to make transitioning illegal." They can transition if they want. They can go. I'm just saying that there's not enough emphasis on that and making people realize it is just a general low perception of self rather than necessarily on gender. It's kind of almost a.
But it's not. That's not what the research says.
It's not quite a gender abolitionist view, but it is somewhat dictated on gender ultimately does not matter. And you could say, well, if gender doesn't matter, why can't you transition freely? Because it's a needless means to dilute and cause harm based on self-perception.
Okay, there was a lot of, I don't see how a lot of those points kind of are congealing with one another. So gender is real because we think it's real. We might abolish it at some point, but right now it's real, and that's what I'm interested in talking about. So there is a conversation to be had, even with trans people. They say if gender was abolished and there was no expectations placed on.
Oh no, I'm not a gender abolitionist. No, I'm just saying that gender really shouldn't. It's a lot like race, and yeah, it does exist, but it really shouldn't matter. We shouldn't use it as a means to judge people. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but we still do, especially in regards to gender, even more so than race. We judge people on gender, and I'm saying that when someone wants to be comfortable within their own skin, no one is saying that they are like have genitals that they don't, or no one's saying that they have chromosomes that they don't, but they're saying that since gender is a social construct, that they are going to be comfortable in their skin that they have. A trans woman is living in a female body if they go by she pronouns, if they present in the way that they feel most comfortable. And again, I don't know what the solution is. Like, do you think psychologists who are treating transgender people should say, well, maybe you should just be comfortable with being a man, or maybe you should just be comfortable with being a woman?
That's a straw man, and this is something I encounter a lot when I argue this point with
that's
people.
Why I'm asking for clarification.
Yeah, they assume that I think that people should just go, oh, deal with the fact that you're a man. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that people should just be like doctors or like psychologists should just be hard asses and just tell them to deal with it. I think it's a long, complicated process as a means to make people feel more comfortable in themselves instead of taking such drastic action, which is not based on natural science. Like, I think there
It is based
an
on natural
extreme
science.
overreaction, which is going to cause more harm than good generally.
It
Whereas
doesn't.
there are better solutions that exist.
Okay, but
Generally, I think what we both agree on in this issue is that we don't want people to commit suicide. We don't want trans people committing suicide.
agreed.
We both agree on that.
And we have a scientifically derived decision on a scientifically derived path forward on how to prevent that.
Okay, now your sort of solution as a means to prevent trans people from taking their own lives is to try and encourage society going forward to accept, be more
Yes.
accepting of trans people and their decision. Okay, I assume that's correct.
Yep.
Okay. My sort of position is to say, rather than making that leap, which I do not believe is supported by, like, it is supported by abstract philosophy rather than
And
natural
scientific
science.
evidence. It is
Okay,
also
how is that scientific evidence?
so because one of them I brought up earlier. I know I was galloping a little bit earlier, but so trans kids who are supported in their identities. These are kids, average age of no, shoot, I didn't write down the average age. I think it was like 9 or 10. They showed no elevation of depression and only slightly elevated levels of anxiety if they're supported in their identities in their environment. So these are kids who are lucky enough to be born to very supportive parents. They're lucky enough to go to very supportive schools, and they don't have any of the depression and anxieties that other trans kids who aren't lucky enough to grow up in that environment go into. That tells me
That's
that
not answering my question.
it is. I'm saying that the environment, if they are supported, their levels of anxiety and depression go far down.
That wasn't my question. My question was, how do you scientifically define that gender is a social construct and not the same as sex? You're just describing this is how it helps, not this is how it is. You're not sort of you're looking at it from a teleological point of view rather than an aetiological point of view.
All right. Well, first off, every single concept is a social construct. Language is a social construct. So
yeah, sure, but it's based on real phenomena. Like there are three. I would say there are rather two main sort of social constructs. For example, there's the social construct of the calendar, in which that is a complete social construct. So, for example, we imagine that as a means to create structure. Whereas something like this water bottle that I'm drinking from, that is real, that is material, that is objective, that exists. So yes, we have created a social construct of what we think water and what we think a drinking bottle is, but that is manifest.
Why are you so resistant to all the research that I've brought forward so far, saying that transitioning?
Because I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical of the intentions. I'm skeptical.
Well, I'm pretty clear with my intentions on bringing forth this research.
No, not your intentions, of the paper's intentions. I'm not trying to say that you're. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying that the papers seem to be pushing a certain philosophical narrative rather than that one that is based in natural science.
Well, of course, anything to do with social sciences is going to be pushing a narrative to a certain degree, because at the end of the paper, there is a conclusion section that says this is what you should do going forward. Every paper does that. Biomechanics papers do that. That is natural science. Every paper is pushing a narrative. That's why we do studies, to push narratives to go forward, to progress.
Well, it's not just about proposing, oh, this is what we should do going forward. It's a means to try and present a philosophical concept as one that is inherently supported by natural science, which I don't think it is.
So, I don't understand how to change someone's mind if they're skeptical of the research that I present. And I have a lot of research supporting this, but they don't have any research to support their own views to be skeptical of it. I understand, like, yeah, if I give you one study, be skeptical of it. If I give you 70 studies, it should probably start, like there should be a study or some sort of body of research you're pointing to.
That's fallacious. That's a fallacious line of thinking. Just because that's I'm trying to think, is it an appeal to majority? Like, just because the majority of studies say one thing does not necessarily mean it's correct. Like, you have presented me nothing to say that the social construct of gender is supported by natural science. You have presented nothing.
I can't support money is uh, supported by natural science, but that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean it isn't real to us. Like I don't
What do you mean
understand.
money? What
Like
do you mean? Like money is
is
not
is money
real?
money is money like represented in the natural world? Is currency represented in the natural world? Is there a physical basis for money, or is it a purely social construct that we've like
It's
uh
primarily a social construct,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, so it absolutely matters, but would I need to bring forth a scientific study that says that money is real? Like any study in economics is making the assumption that money is real, even though it's a social construct. And so the philosophical ideas that we're putting forth is, in this case, is gender is different than sex because that is what a lot of sociological research
But my
says.
point is that
That's
I
not
feel, yeah, I know I'm saying this is my opinion, but generally it is supported that these things are the concept of gender is materially manifest based on the genitals in which they are born with. I know I'm sounding like a broken record in saying that. I'm saying that I do not feel that they're
well. Let's bring it.
the only reason the
Okay.
distinction exists is a means to try and resolve a congruence between
Well,
gender dysphoria.
well, yeah.
I
Let's
feel it's a
let's bring
means.
something back just a little bit. Something you said that I really noticed. You said that just because that there's a majority of scientific research that shows one thing to be true doesn't mean it is true. But that is how we determine scientific truth. There is no objective truth out there that science finds. It's just whatever the majority of scientists find and agree on. That's all. That's as close as you're ever going to get to objectivity in science or an
I
objective
mean, this is
truth.
sort of getting into the more sort of general philosophical argument of everything is subjective based upon. Like, that's a much sort of very broad subject, I would say.
Yeah, but again, to bring it back to this, I've presented quite a bit of evidence to say that transitioning does help. It is the best way forward that we
I'm not
found.
like you seem to think that I don't think that it can help. I'm saying in instances it can help. In many instances it doesn't and can make things worse. And what I'm trying to say is I think we should try to look for something that has a better success rate than what we have currently. The problem is that to bring this back to the woke left is that they seem to think that searching for such a solution is discriminating against trans people.
Uh,
And just I want what's best for people. I don't want to be an arsehole to deny people the right to being trans. I just don't see it as viable a solution as it is presented currently.
all right, so I'm gonna give you a chance to steel man your argument here. So when you say that we shouldn't be pushing gender ideology on kids, have you said that before
Um,
or
that is
someone
something I
similar?
would agree with.
Okay, so what do you mean when you say that?
I think generally we should not be pushing the idea of gender norms and gender, what is commonly accepted as this is what you must do if you are to be this gender onto kids. And in the same respect, I do not think that we should create confusion within children as to suggest you might not be the biological sex in which you are born with, because I feel that's gaslighting in a sense.
Okay, you understand that no one pushes that on their kids. Their kids are the ones that start bringing that up, right?
No, that's not necessarily true.
No one is saying, "Hey, you think that you are a boy because you were."
No, they do it like that. Like, it's more subtle than that. I'm not saying, oh, you are, like, I'm not saying I would point at my nephew, for example, and say, you are a girl or something like that. No, it's not like that. But it is more sowing the seeds of doubt. I'm just going to be real quick just to nip to the toilet. Sorry about this.
Okay, I'm a little bit lost here. I have a ton of research, and that's what I'm trying to base everything in. But I don't know how to go forward. Yeah, yeah, but I have asked that, and okay, that's what I'm trying to get right now. But it's what he said was essentially just supporting transitioning. Like the definition he gave of an alternative is the definition of transitioning. Just a waiting. We'll probably wrap this up within the next 15, 20 minutes. I think we're going in circles a little bit. We're just waiting. Yeah, chat, if you have any more questions that you'd like to ask either of us, shoot them out there. Shoot them out, chat. I'm practicing my streamer lingo. Vape Nation. Didn't realize you could hear that so much on.
Right, I'm back. Do you want to sort of move on to maybe another subject, or should we stick on this
Sure,
one?
you got something in mind?
I guess we could sort of talk about your video with regards to jokes,
Oh,
like
hell
with
yeah.
regards to
That is my favorite topic right now.
humor and morality.
There's one
because you said you wanted to sort of talk about that.
I don't want one last point on that, and then I promise we will move on. I won't let it. We'll end here. So, what do you think that trans people? Let's make it trans kids because that's the big issue. What do you think that we should do with kids who say that they are trans and they don't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth?
I would say I would say generally that not to say, oh, no, you're wrong, or to say, oh, to point the finger and like be malignant towards them, but to assume that they are too young to make that decision, because when you are young, you generally have more insecurities in yourself, especially in teenage years. You have a lot more insecurities in yourself. And as a result of that, like, kids are not educated enough to make that judgment call about themselves because they are experiencing a myriad of emotions.
Okay, so we'll leave it at that, like I promised. But I really would look into the research around a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, link me some stuff afterwards if you want, or if someone wants to link me stuff on Twitter, go ahead. Because I'm not like completely stubborn on this. I'm not saying I will never change my mind on this. Like, if there is conclusive research to suggest what is being said is right, I will take a look at it. I will have my criticisms. I will look at it with an open mind, but I will also look at it as a means to potentially criticize it. Like, I will have a degree of skepticism, but I'm also not just going to denounce it just because of where it came from, or like, I'll look at the pros and cons. But anyway,
just recognize that you set a very high bar for what you deem as conclusive evidence. But let's get into talking about humor and jokes, because that is oh man, I love that so much. This is what my passion project is right now, and I also think it pairs nicely with the woke left and how
I think that was a very well made video. Like, you clearly put a lot of effort into making
thank you.
I was very impressed. I would say, in terms of how I define humor, I am not an expert. I probably don't know nearly as much as you do on the subject, but I would say humor, the primary element to humor is subversion, in the sense that you are either sort of subverting societal norms or subverting someone. It's to undermine them, as well as sort of act as a surprise mechanism. It's surprising and undermining. So that's sort of subversion, I would see, as sort of the catch-all term.
Let me test my own video here. Do you remember the main theory that I put forth? Let me test my own video here.
Which theory was that?
Ah, shucks. That's a failure on my part.
Yeah, you're just saying a theory. Are you talking about the
primary theory that I put forth in the video? I'm testing my own video.
That was.
Do you know what it was called?
Begins with Adolf's theory. I forget.
Benign violation theory.
Oh no! I was thinking of the moral theory.
Oh, Augusto Blasi's.
Yeah, Blasi's. That's the one. Yeah. I knew it was like there was an A in there that was beginning with A there somewhere.
Oh, it's cool you remember that one, because I glossed over that real quick. Yeah, so benign violation theory, and you're kind of on the nose there. So, benign violation theory says that something is found humorous if it violates a norm, but simultaneously that norm is recognized as benign.
Hmm. So, for example, I don't want this to be like too much just me explaining comedy because I'm not the funniest fucking person. Like I really aren't. But for example, a pun is funny because you are sort of subverting the use of the English language. So something like gingerbread man instead of gingerbread man,
Yeah.
like that, someone would find that sort of entertaining. But because that's been done so many times, that puns no longer have their value. Whereas if someone there's a funny friend of mine who from Ukraine, and he says stuff like. I don't know. I can't think of a good example. Something like Ben Shapiro, more like Ben Shapiro out, or something like that. Like it's so intentionally unfunny that it kind of becomes funny in a
Yeah.
sense, like
You-
because it's sort of ridiculing people who would make that kind of joke.
Yeah, you're setting up a pun, so it's obvious in the way he's setting up that sentence that it's going to be a pun. But then it's such a bad pun that it goes right back around to being subverting your expectations, and he does so in a way that's benign because it's not going to
And
offend you.
it's also sort of mocking people who would make those kinds of jokes because it's such a basic joke. But um, I think an important part to comedy is punching up and punching down. Like I think those are. Would you agree with me on that?
To a certain extent, yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
So
it's what's talked a lot about in offensive humor. That's how a lot of offensive humor is
mm,
phrased.
so the way in which I see it, and one of the critiques that I have, um, and this is something you covered in your video actually, with regards to humor, is that it can be used as almost like a Trojan horse as a means to push bad ideas. You had the motif going on with the joke about the possums in your video, for example.
Hmm.
That was clearly meant to represent what the alt right would call great replacement theory, and they are using comedy as a means to try and push a bad idea forward.
Hmm.
Would you agree with my analysis on that?
I'm very happy that you said that. Yeah, that's what I tried to do.
Yeah. My issue is with regards to the breadtube crowd. Not all of them. Like I quite like Angie Speaks. Actually, she's quite good. But generally, that is the impression that I get from a lot of breadtubers, sort of mainline breadtubers, is that they are trying to push a certain narrative which is against critical thinking and to accepting their viewpoints without substantiating on them, so long as say, lol, Ben Shapiro is dumb, or something like that, or some variation of that. Like, I think the perfect example that encapsulates it is in one of H Bomber Guy's videos with
I was about
regards
to bring that up. Yeah.
yeah, in I think it was like a Sargon petition one where he just brought up out of nowhere the fact that there was like a Twitter bird in the background of Sargon's screen. Like, okay, that's quite funny. Like, I'm not gonna lie, even though I don't like H Bomber Guy, that was quite funny. But at the end of the day, what does that really accomplish other than undermining Sargon? That was the intent, was to undermine Sargon. And you could
Yeah,
say,
I
well,
agree with
yes,
that.
that
I absolutely agree
yeah.
with that.
Now you could say yes, that is a good thing that he undermined Sargon because Sargon deserved to be undermined. My issue is when you see people, and this is what I'm seeing, when you see the contemporary social attitudes echo the viewpoints of BreadTube
Hmm.
and echo these sort of very sort of unsubstantiated viewpoints, you sort of realize, well, what exactly is it trying to push? Is it trying to encourage people? I'm not going to say Sargon is like a great person or anything like that. I actively do not like the guy anymore because of some of the things that he's done. But at the very least, he's sort of trying to, like in some of his videos, he's trying to encourage some degree of critical thinking.
Hmm.
Whereas when you see a video like H Bomber Guy's response video, the pure intent was to try and make him look stupid. That is the intent that I get with BreadTube. Rather than having a fair dialogue with someone, it is an intent to make their opposition look as stupid as possible so that they can look intelligent by proxy. It's a framing device,
Oh, absolutely.
essentially.
Yeah, I don't. So I agree with the concepts that you're putting forth. Humor is rhetoric. Humor is an argument, and humor is a very effective way of pushing an argument. Let me give you an example, and I want to see if you agree with it. So it's another one of H. Bomber Guy's videos. It was the one on climate change. Did you ever see that one?
I don't think I did because I
Okay, you don't have
probably
to.
agree with him on it.
Yeah, you don't have to. You have to have seen it. So, are you familiar with Ben Shapiro's remark that what happens if? So, what if the sea level does rise 10 feet? Don't you think that people in coastal areas will just sell their homes and move? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, yeah, I've seen that clip.
Yeah, you've seen that clip because it's around the internet. So that was a very funny, over-the-top joke that was pushing rhetoric. It was there to highlight how stupid it was. There to make Ben Shapiro look stupid, and that was the goal of the joke. But it was also the reason it looks stupid is because there's an inherent logic within the joke that they're also trying to push. So comedy, there is a logical train of thought that you have to complete when you are uh, forming comedy, and there's also a logical train of thought that the audience goes through if they laugh at something. They connect point A to point B, and the way they get there is through logic. And so when you hear H. Palmer make that joke, blast through the wall, sell the houses to who, Ben? Fucking Aquaman!
Not a bad impression.
Yeah. That is a joke that is making an argument, and the logical train of thought is there. Like from setup to punchline, that's a logic train of thought that shows you why that statement was so dumb.
Okay, and even on its own, it's dumb. I'm not going to deny that. But there's a quote because I'm actually working on a sort of response video of sorts, sort of highlighting my issues with RedTube. And one of the quote that I use at the very beginning of the video,
Real quick,
is
I'm sorry.
from-
Do you have a YouTube channel? I'll put it in the. I'll put it in.
I've not
description.
uploaded anything publicly yet.
Okay.
Like I've got.
Okay, I looked so I could put it in the description.
No, don't worry about it. There's nothing public on there yet. But there's an excellent quote by Cicero, and no, I didn't read him just because fucking Razorfist made a terrible video about him. Well, actually, I don't know if it's terrible, but Razorfist makes me laugh because it's. But there's an excellent quote by Cicero saying, "Wisdom without eloquence does too little for the good of communities, but eloquence without wisdom is, in most instances, extremely harmful and never beneficial." And that's the impression that I get from RedTube, in which it's more about framing these people, the anti-SJWs that they generally argue against, as stupid or bad people, as opposed to actually engaging their ideas fairly. To her credit, I say ContraPoints is one of the better people with regards to this, but I still think she falls into that pitfall.
Oh, of course. I mean, the goal of this content is to fight against the right, and so of course, that I think it's pretty fair to say that that's what my content is for. I want to, well, to a certain extent, some of the videos. So in my humor video, there are definitely jokes on the left that would be just as illustrative, but I'm less concerned with them because generally jokes coming from the left are pushing something that I agree with, and jokes from the right are pushing something that I don't agree with. And I do make an example in the video that says that there's a video of a Nazi getting punched in the face that I think is really, really funny. And to draw from that, I say, do you think you can make a reasonable assessment of my character now that you know that I think that video is really, really funny? So that's where I tried to bring it back to not just shitting on the right, but also showing that this exists as a concept that can be applied to everybody.
Let me give you an interesting example of that. There was a video going around a few months back of an Antifa member getting knocked out. I'm not sure who by exactly, but I didn't find it funny because I don't sort of find violence funny. But what someone had made an edited version of it in which they had added Streets of Rage 2 sound and music to it.
Yeah.
And it just, like, I think it was that addition that they were sort of drawing a parallel between what's going on in places like Portland between the Proud Boys and Antifa and Streets of Rage, which made me find it hilarious. I wasn't finding the act of someone being hurt hilarious. I'm just finding the act of it being compared to Streets, like a video game that I play and really like.
The theory behind that is that since they've created some psychological distance between the real event and your own perception of it, there's enough psychological distance there for you to find the violation of that violence to be benign.
Because normally, I mean, if someone wanted to, I'm thinking of another example. Like, I think I wouldn't find that Nazi clip on its own funny, but if someone were to say add like a punch out sound effect to it or something, like, you know, when you get knocked to the canvas and punch out and that woo 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 sound, like that would just make it funny to me.
Yeah.
Like I think it's less so the actual Yeah, I think it's. I don't remember where I'm really going on about here, but like I think like it's not so much the violence that would make me laugh in that context. It's that they've applied such an element to it which makes it so ridiculous.
So
But it's also kind of relatable.
So here's a last topic that will, and before we go too long, because I've work here in a few hours, but it ties into this I think pretty well. So, do you think that the left is ruining comedy? And I realize that's a loaded question, but I'm trying to be a little bit broad. Do you think that the left is ruining comedy? And if so, why and how?
Um, it's not so much comedy, like, well, yeah, it's a very sort of broad generalization when you sort of say the left, because as we sort of described, there's different categories of the left.
The woke left. How about that?
Um, and even then, I wouldn't say it's so much comedy, but the way in which the information is relayed and presented, the framing, and honestly, I know a lot of people are going to say tone police, but it is the tone is actually very important in this. It does seem to me that it is based on denying critical thought, objections to their ideology, as opposed to actually engaging with people who may have critiques. Not you, because I, had conversations with you, and I know other people. I know that people on the woke left are capable of having these conversations. Not just you. I'm not saying that you're an outlier, but there is this general ethos in which this is sort of accepted as almost a defense mechanism. And to be fair, I can understand why I have my own sort of defense mechanisms in place. Everyone sort of has these defense mechanisms in place to not want to go on and try and describe it to someone, describe things to people who clearly wouldn't listen. So like you're not going to have the same kind of conversation with someone who just uses 4chan and just like
Yeah.
knows very basic things about politics. Like,
Can you give me a specific example of kind of what you were talking about? Because yeah. Can you give me a specific example?
I think it sort of goes back to the Sam Harrising, or if I sort of relayed or rather, I'm not trying to be egotistical and make it about myself. If I sort of said these things on Twitter, I would very likely be socially dogpiled upon with regards to the trans conversation. If I sort of said these things, there would be people not trying to say that this is why you are wrong, this is why you are wrong. It would be just like, lol, look at the transphobe, look at the turf, or stuff like that. Like, it would be an attempt to make me feel bad about myself instead of a means to convince me. It is destructive criticism rather than constructive criticism, because as I've outlined, I'm willing to accept if people want to say, okay, this is why I disagree with you, and present their sort of framework. But if it's just coming across as someone going, you're a dumbass or something like that, then it just strikes me as a means of maintaining some kind of control of the situation to try and put me in my place. And I think this has happened to.
Here's an example that might be.
This has not just happened to me. Like, this has happened to a lot of people.
Here's an example that you're probably familiar with that I think might illustrate what you're trying to get at. The Kevin Hart Oscars controversy. Do you remember that?
I actually don't.
Really? Oh.
I know. Is this the reason why the Oscars have no hosts now? Because
yes.
I heard a little bit about it, but I didn't really pay attention to it, so I don't know everything.
That sucks. I thought it was gonna be like the perfect representation of what you were talking about.
You can elaborate if you want, because
okay.
I've
maybe
probably forgotten it.
Yeah, maybe you've seen. So Kevin Hart was set to host the Oscars, and people brought up jokes that he had made in his stand-up specials and on Twitter that were homophobic in nature, like homophobic and transphobic in nature. And so people brought those up from his past, from about 6-7 years ago, and his apology that came out just said like, hey. Like, people grow and all that stuff, and a lot of people say that apology didn't acknowledge that what he said was homophobic, and kind of just skirted the issue it was a non-apology essentially. And people on the right were saying that there's nothing you can do to placate people who can't take a joke,
because their implicit idea is that they are in the right in that situation. For example, if I were Kevin Hart in that situation, unless I completely accepted the premise in which I was being attacked for was 100% correct, then I would be in a no-win situation essentially. Like that would be the only way in which you could placate that audience.
Well,
Or placate. I actually forget how you pronounce that word. Is it placate or placate?
placate.
Okay.
In my mind, that, and this is the logical conclusion I came to from analyzing that joke. That so the joke in question was it's centered around like if he can stop his kid from being gay, he will, and so he'll do things like the punchline for a lot of jokes was no, that's gay. So the structure of the joke is saying that being gay is bad. Now he even says, now I'm not homophobic, but if I can keep my kids from being gay, I will. And that is a homophobic joke. It is gay is a bad thing that you don't want your kids to be. There was no
Yeah, I would say that's homophobic.
no. So that doesn't mean that doesn't mean he is homophobic, but it would be nice for a major comedian who has had homophobic material in the past to acknowledge that like I've grown as a person since then, and that kind of joke isn't acceptable anymore. And the way that a lot of people on the right will frame that is, oh, the left can't take a joke.
I mean, like I said, I'm sort of withdrawn from the context a little bit, so I can.
Yeah, you don't have to
I'm trying
trust.
to think of a.
You can look it up. You don't have to trust my interpretation of it.
Yeah, like I would have to be more like familiar with what exactly happened, so I could like give an educated take on it, rather than just saying, "Oh, the right is right," or "Oh, the left is right." Like, I would say there was an incident where Alan Sugar made a tweet. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Alan Sugar. He's the guy who founded Amstrad. He's like I don't know if he's a billionaire, but he's definitely a millionaire. He's sort of like generally left leaning, I would say, in his views, though. But he made a joke about I think it was the Cameroon football team during the 2014 World Cup. He said something about baggage boys, and he was sort of interpreted as being racist. I think one of the best ways actually to determine the intent of a joke from someone is to try and judge by intent. You have to look at it as, is this person trying to cause harm? Is this person trying to just make a joke and be free spirited? Is this person trying to push a narrative? Like, you have to sort of determine what exactly is somebody doing. And with BreadTube, I feel the idea is to push a certain narrative of which I do not agree with.
So, especially in regards to jokes, I'd say intent is irrelevant. It is not important in humor whatsoever unless you're trying to be funny. But in terms of actual finding something funny and the structure of a joke and why you find it funny, all of that is reaction. Comedians don't.
I mean, fair enough. For example, like, I was trying to think of a good example. Like, there was a video I used to watch the hell out of when I was younger called Funny Cats. And one of the clips was like a cat jumped out of a bush or something and like tackled a toddler to the ground. Like, I'm not saying the cat's intent was to actually hurt the child or be funny or anything like that. Like, that wasn't the intent. But you can't really judge that by intent because
it's reaction. A cat did something unexpected, but everything's okay, and no one got hurt, and it was just a funny reaction that you weren't expecting. So yeah, that's why you find it funny. The same is said of any kind of joke. So the number one rule in comedy is know your audience. You have to know who you're trying to make laugh, and what you're trying to push. So a lot of this happens on both sides, and I hate it on both sides. But obviously, I hate it more when the right does it because I don't like the right. But I say this does happen on both sides. Is you can't take what I say seriously. It's just a joke. You can't look at the effect. It doesn't matter if a joke's homophobic. It's just a joke. You can't take it seriously. And I hate that defense so much. I hate it when Steven Crowder does it, and I hate it when John Oliver does it.
It is. I think Kraut actually said it best in. It's just a meme, guys. Like I think he got it, like nailed it when he said that. Like it's just a means to try. I'm not saying it always is, but oftentimes it can be a means to push a narrative that is not that is generally not good. And comedy is essentially almost like a gateway, like I don't want to say Trojan horse because I've already said that, but it's like a gear and push that forward. It's a mechanism. It's a tool.
Yep, it's a very, very effective tool.
And I think what I would sort of like from and to be fair, like people like not BreadTube, people like ContraPoints, I think are a bit better at this than others. Are better at sort of explaining their philosophical justifications as to why they believe what they believe, instead of just making us accept it, instead of just focusing on humor and just saying, you must find this funny because, you must find this true because it is funny. Like, I think that's just a very sort of disingenuous framing device.
Well, they're not. We'll end on some controversy. I think that's true. I think if you find something funny, you find it true. At least in that moment, you might think about it and not find it true later, but in the moment, you think it's true, or at least whatever the message of the joke is being true. Like for example, there was a joke that James Woods made a few months back, where he took that that clip of Anderson Cooper, that meme of him where he's going the face. Well, James Wood made a joke on Twitter that says that feeling when your butt plug pops out, and people got offended at that joke for very good reason. And then people on the right would defend it and say, "Hey, why can't you just take a joke? It's not homophobic. Why don't you just take a joke?" Well,
I mean, it doesn't. That one's a bit harder to judge on intent because you could say as if that was someone who was straight who did that. Mm-hmm. You could still essentially construct the same joke and still get a laugh. Like you could. I'm not like if that was say someone like I don't know Sargon or something, or I don't know just anyone who was straight. I don't know why I brought up Sargon specifically. Yeah. It was just someone because we were talking about him earlier. But if that was just anyone, then
the joke structure would be structure would be the same, but the fact that Anderson Cooper is a gay man means when you are formulating the logical train of thought in your own head of what that joke entails, how do you get from punchline to how do you get from setup to punchline? You have to take into account that a lot of people know that Anderson Cooper is gay, and that adds a layer to the joke. And if you are a homophobic person who thinks that gay people are sexual deviants, that joke is going to be even funnier to you because it's fundamentally true. And people who don't think that it's right to generalize gay people as sexual deviants or not even sexually deviant, just people who are sexual by nature, who would wear a butt plug on TV because that's what gay people do. I think it's right to be offended by that. And I think anybody who says that joke isn't pushing a narrative, or at least it could push a narrative, because again, people can take that joke.
I think it's pushing a narrative, but more so that less so homophobia, but it could be. But this is why I sort of believe on an innocent until proven guilty principle. But also, I think the generally accepted, whether or not you see it as homophobic or not, the generally accepted intent was that it was to try and undermine Anderson Cooper. You and I think, would agree on that it was trying to undermine him. Whether it was the intent was to be homophobic or not, I'm not sure. People could read into that to assume that it is, I can choose to take this homophobic. I can choose to see this as not homophobic, for example. But I think the thing that matters most is what was the person trying to tell the joke say? And ultimately, it's kind of ambiguous. I would say not necessarily, and to assume innocence unless there is legitimate proof of guilt, which
you can never prove that someone is intentionally made a joke to be homophobic. You can never prove.
It just depends on the structure of the joke.
Here's why I would say. So James Woods is a very, very conservative person. He's made it very, very clear that he does not like gay people. He thinks that we're gross. He doesn't like us very much at all. That's what any of his tweets regarding homosexuality. This is what his tweets are like. He also lets it know that he does not like Anderson Cooper, and it is very reasonable in my mind to say that he is trying to undermine Anderson Cooper by reminding you that he's gay, and he knows who follows him. He knows his audience, and he knows that if he says, "Hey, this person is bad because they're gay," remember he's gay and that's bad. And that's why this joke is funny. I think it's a very reasonable train of thought that lets me inductively reason that he is homophobic and that this joke was intended to be homophobic.
I mean, I tend to be a bit more charitable in those situations in which if the joke sort of works on a level which does not necessarily, because this joke works on a level in which it doesn't have to be homophobic, I do not inherently assume it as such. Whereas if James Woods, for example, is homophobic, I think that truth will eventually emerge. But until that, because I don't follow James Woods, I don't remember. I've seen him act in things, but
it's emerged. He is the only person who has played a villain who is actual garbage. He is the best of villains because he's actual garbage. So.
I remember that. To be fair, I found that really cringeworthy. I watched that Lindsay Ellis video where she was talking about Disney villains. And she's just like, "Oh, Hades, he's actually played by a villain." That just made me laugh out loud. It was so, no offense, but I thought that was so childish.
Yeah, yeah, I could see it. I like that joke though. That's it was obvious. That's what I was remembering and misquoting. All right, well, I
Um,
can't talk any more about this subject without giving away like all of the script that I'm writing. So
okay.
you want
Like,
to end
but
it on that
James
one?
Woods, I actually, I don't know. I like him as an actor, but like, I never really sort of followed him. Like, he seems somewhat intelligent, but I don't think his takes are the best. They're
Yeah,
very conservative, boomer, bordering. I would say alt right. I would say he's alt right. I don't know if
yeah,
I'd go as far as say he's like a damn fascist or anything, but
yeah.
I'd say he's alt right.
So do you think it's fair not to extend him a ton of charity when he makes a joke that could be interpreted as homophobic?
Um, I think it depends on your relationship with the person. For example, I think you'll agree with me with this. I do really dislike Ian Miles Chong. I really dislike Ian Miles Chong. I think he's a piece of shit.
Yep.
He made a comment about uh, talking about a member of Antifa who had visible wrist slits on, you know,
Yep.
slit wrists, and was saying stuff like LMAO and stuff like that. And it's like this girl slit her wrist, and then when he was pressured, no, actually no, he did another thing. He tried to talk a person into committing suicide on Twitter,
I remember
and
that. That
when
was one
he
of
was
my
called out
friends.
for
Yeah.
that, he just said, "Oh, I was just joking. God, take a joke." It's just like, fuck you, asshole. Like,
Yeah.
you don't fucking joke about trying to push people into suicide. Like, yeah, okay, that's like my moral son. I'm not saying you can't joke about suicide in an intelligent way, but that was clearly an intent to try and hurt someone. Like that I don't think you can argue. You can't just say, lol, just joking about
Yeah.
that, because you can judge. I think you can judge. You have enough
Well,
social ability to judge that.
the last thing, I wouldn't draw the dichotomy between intent and joking. Like he was joking there, but he also kind of meant it. Like,
I don't think
yeah,
he was joking. He just tried to
yeah,
use that as an excuse.
yeah. A lot of people do that, but
Like he
yeah.
was sincere in what he was trying to say.
Well,
Like I,
almost all jokes are sincere to a certain extent, right? Like again, if you're placating to an audience, you want to. If a joke has a false premise, you're not going to really listen to it. So, yeah, a joke has to contain something that the audience thinks
yeah,
is
sure.
true. So, all right, and that's about all I have time for today. Thank you a lot for agreeing to this conversation. I don't think it was as bombastic as it could have been. So
We had our moments.
we had the moments, but yeah, I was prepared for something way meaner. But I think it
Oh,
was
like trust
yeah.
me, I'm an asshole on Twitter. I don't deny that. Like, if I had more room in my Twitter profile, I'd say actually less of an asshole as I present myself on Twitter. I think everyone sort of does that. Like, I think once you sort of remove the sort of social cues of, you add social cues of actually hearing voice and inflections, that solves a lot of things. And it's even more so when you're face to face with someone.
Well, of course, yeah. Even if we can't see each other, maybe you can sort of see me. It turns out, so I have a second monitor that is a way different resolution, and sometimes YouTube fucks up with it. I thought I was frozen for this entire time, and then I move it back over here, and then I can see the video just fine. So, yeah. Hope I didn't do anything dumb on camera, assuming that I was not opened or not visible. So cool, awesome. Yeah, that's also why I was looking down the whole time. I just thought my camera wasn't working. So neat. All right, man. I guess we'll leave it there. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything you'd like to say, or anything you'd like to promote?
No, not really. It was a good chat. I'm glad we had it.
Yeah, I'm glad I had fun. All right, and I have to do it. It's the thing to do now. Can I get a trans rights for the end of the video?
Trans rights.
Thank you very much. All right, man. We're gonna end it
Yes,
there.
well, I'm expecting them. I'm expecting uh, people to try and use this to shame me later on, where I'll be like, "Oh, what you said, trans rights." It's like, yeah, I'm against trans people being discriminated against with property and like getting banned from the military. Like I think we all agree on that. I mean, unless
There
you're
we
like,
go. That's all I needed to hear, man. All right, so we're gonna end it there, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to me ramble and completely not understand how to do any sort of technology. So cool. Peace out, and thanks Harlan for being a part of it, man. I appreciate it. I
no
enjoyed the
problem.
conversation. All right, y'all have a good one.